The year was 2475, and humanity had finally begun to stretch its arms beyond the confines of Earth. Colonies dotted distant planets, and ships traveled between stars like birds migrating across oceans. Among these vessels was Solace, a massive hospital ship that served as a beacon of hope for those caught in the chaos of interstellar wars. It wasn't armed. It didn't need to be. Its mission was simple: heal the wounded, comfort the suffering, and remind everyone, human or alien, that compassion still existed in this vast, cold universe. On board Solace were hundreds of people from all walks of life. Doctors rushed through corridors lined with medical beds, tending to patients with injuries both physical and psychological. Nurses whispered soothing words to frightened children who clutched stuffed animals brought from faraway homes. Engineers worked tirelessly in the lower decks, ensuring the ship's systems ran smoothly so that no one would go without care. And then there was June, a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 20s who spent most of her time tinkering with machines in the engineering bay. June wasn't much of a talker. She preferred the hum of machinery over idle chatter. Her dark hair was always tied back in a neat ponytail, and her hands were often smudged with grease. Despite her reserved nature, she was widely respected aboard Solace. After all, many of the advanced medical tools used on the ship were her designs. Her latest project, however, was something entirely different, a prototype device she called the Quantum Destabilizer. It was small enough to fit in her palm, but powerful enough to disrupt energy fields. June hadn't told anyone what it was for yet. Truthfully, she wasn't sure herself. But deep down, she felt it might come in handy someday. Captain Tae-hyun stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless expanse of space. He was a tall man with sharp features and an even sharper mind. Under his command, Solace had saved countless lives, earning praise from colonies across the galaxy. Yet today, something felt off. The sensors showed nothing unusual, just empty space stretching out in every direction. But years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. "Anything?" he asked Lieutenant Min-ju, the young officer seated at the helm. "No, sir," Min-ju replied, glancing up from her console. "All clear." Tae-hyun nodded but didn't relax. His gut told him danger lurked nearby, even if the instruments couldn't detect it. Still, there was little he could do except wait. So he turned his attention back to the viewport, watching as stars twinkled faintly against the blackness. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed to blur when you were floating in the void of space. Then, without warning, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, bathing the corridors in eerie glow. Everyone froze, unsure what was happening. "Report," Tae-hyun barked, striding toward Min-ju's station. "We're surrounded," she cried, panic creeping into her voice. "Multiple ships decloaking around us." Sure enough, the view outside confirmed her words. Dozens of sleek, angular vessels materialized out of nowhere, surrounding Solace like predators circling prey. They bore markings unfamiliar to anyone on board, a jagged symbol resembling a claw. Their hulls gleamed menacingly under the light of a nearby star. Before Tae-hyun could issue another order, a voice crackled over the comms. It was harsh and guttural, spoken in a language none of them understood. A translation program kicked in moments later, rendering the message in halting, robotic English. "This is Commander Vorik of the Vadran Empire," the voice announced. "You are trespassing in restricted territory. Surrender immediately or face annihilation." Tae-hyun frowned. Restricted territory? They were in neutral space, far from any known borders. This had to be some kind of mistake. "We are a hospital ship," he said calmly into the mic, "unarmed and providing humanitarian aid. We mean no harm." There was a pause, followed by a low chuckle. "Your presence here is proof of espionage," Vorik sneered. "Do not insult my intelligence, human." Before Tae-hyun could respond, the transmission cut off. Moments later, the Vadran ships opened fire. Energy beams lanced through space, striking Solace's shields with devastating force. Alarms wailed louder than ever as the ship shuddered violently. People screamed, scrambling for cover as explosions rocked the halls. Down in the engineering bay, June barely had time to react. One moment, She was adjusting the settings on her destabilizer. The next, she was thrown to the floor as the entire room shook. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and panels sparked ominously overhead. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. She grabbed the destabilizer and shoved it into her pocket before scrambling to her feet. "Everyone evacuate!" someone shouted nearby. Ji-yoon didn't argue. She joined the flood of crew members rushing toward the emergency exits, dodging falling debris along the way. The air smelled of smoke and fear, and the sound of groaning metal filled her ears. As she reached the main corridor, she saw Captain Taehyun leading a group of survivors toward the escape pods. His face was grim, his uniform torn and singed. "Get to the pods," he ordered, motioning for everyone to hurry. "We can't hold out much longer." June hesitated, looking back toward the engineering bay. If she left now, her destabilizer would be lost forever. But staying meant risking capture, or worse. Just as she made up her mind to follow the others, a deafening boom echoed through the ship. The lights flickered, plunging the hallway into darkness. When they came back on, Ji-yoon found herself alone. The others had already fled, leaving her stranded amidst the wreckage. Footsteps echoed in the distance, alien footsteps. Heavy boots clanged against the metal floor, growing closer with each passing second. Ji-yoon pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. She reached into her pocket and gripped the destabilizer tightly. Whatever happened next, she vowed not to go down without a fight. The invaders appeared moments later. A squad of towering, insect-like creatures clad in armored suits. Their eyes glowed red beneath their helmets, scanning the area with mechanical precision. When they spotted Ji-yoon cowering in the shadows, they raised their weapons and barked orders in their guttural tongue. For a brief moment, Ji-yoon considered activating the destabilizer, but she quickly realized it wouldn't do any good. Not yet. Instead, she raised her hand slowly, surrendering to the inevitable. As the aliens dragged her away, she stole one last glance at the ruined ship behind her. Tears welled in her eyes, not just for herself, but for everyone who had died today, for the dream of peace that now lay in ashes. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. Somewhere deep inside her, a spark of defiance ignited. These monsters had attacked a hospital ship, a place of healing and refuge. They had slaughtered innocents without mercy. And Ji-yoon swore silently that they would pay for what they had done, even if it cost her everything. The Vadran prison colony was a nightmare wrapped in steel. It orbited a dying star, its surface bathed in an eerie red glow that seemed to seep into the very bones of those trapped inside. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, fear, and despair. Rows of cramped cells stretched endlessly, each one holding prisoners from countless species. Humans, aliens, even beings whose forms June couldn't begin to understand. She sat huddled in a corner of her cell, knees drawn to her chest, trying to block out the screams that echoed through the facility. June had been stripped of everything except the clothes on her back and the prototype destabilizer hidden in her pocket. Somehow, during the chaos of her capture, she had managed to keep it concealed. Now, as she stared at the cold metal floor, she clutched it tightly, feeling its weight like a lifeline. If nothing else, she told herself she still had this, and maybe, just maybe, it could be their way out. The days blurred together in a haze of monotony and terror. Meals were meager, delivered by robotic drones that hovered silently outside the cells. Guards patrolled the corridors, their insect-like forms casting long shadows on the walls. They spoke rarely, communicating instead through gestures or sharp bursts of their guttural language. When they did speak, it was usually to bark orders or threats. Overseer Juan was the worst of them all. Unlike the other guards, he didn't wear armor. Instead, he moved freely among the prisoners, his tall frame draped in a black cloak that billowed behind him like smoke. His face was partially obscured by a mask, but his glowing red eyes burned with cruel intelligence. He took pleasure in breaking spirits, whether through physical torture or psychological manipulation. Every prisoner feared him, and for good reason. One day, Overseer Juan entered June's cell without warning. She flinched instinctively, pressing herself against the wall as he loomed over her. "You're clever," he said in broken English, his voice dripping with disdain. "I can see in your eyes. But cleverness won't save you here. He reached down and grabbed her wrist, yanking her to her feet. June winced but refused to cry out. Juan studied her for a moment before shoving her toward the door. "Come," he commanded. "You will work." From then on, June was forced to labor alongside other prisoners in the colony's industrial sector. Machines hummed and clanked around them, producing weapons and components for the Vadran War effort. The work was grueling, designed not only to exploit their labor, but also to crush their will. Many collapsed under the strain, only to be dragged away by guards and never seen again. Despite the horrors, June kept her mind sharp. While others succumbed to exhaustion or despair, she observed everything: the layout of the facility, the routines of the guards, the weaknesses in the machinery. At night, when the lights dimmed and the patrols grew sparse, she sketched crude diagrams in the dirt using a shard of metal sheet stolen from the factory floor. Slowly but surely, a plan began to take shape in her mind. It wasn't long before word spread about June's reputation as an inventor. One evening, as she lay curled up in her cell, a young man approached her. His name was Minsu, and he looked barely older than 20. His face was gaunt, his body thin from months of captivity, but his eyes burned with determination. "You're the engineer, right?" he whispered, glancing nervously at the bars. "The one who built those medical tools?" June nodded cautiously. "What about it?" "I need your help," Minsu said. "I'm planning an escape, but I can't do it alone. If you can figure out how to disable the locks or sabotage the power grid, we might have a chance." June hesitated. Escaping sounded impossible, especially given the tight security. But staying meant certain death, or worse. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly, "but we'll need more people." Over the next few weeks, June and Minsu quietly recruited others to join their cause. There was Su Bin, a former pilot whose quick thinking had saved her crew during a skirmish with pirates. Unji, a medic with extensive knowledge of alien biology, offered her expertise in disabling the guard suits. Together, they formed a small resistance group, united by a shared desire for freedom. Their first act of defiance came when June discovered a flaw in the ventilation system. Using scrap scavenged in the factory, she fashioned a device that released a harmless gas into the air ducts. When the guard began coughing uncontrollably, the prisoners seized the opportunity to raid the supply rooms. They emerged victorious, carrying food, water, and weapons, all vital resources for their eventual breakout. Encouraged by their success, the group grew bolder. They sabotaged key systems within the colony, causing minor disruptions that sowed confusion among the Vadrans. Each victory boosted morale, proving that even the smallest acts of rebellion could make a difference. But June knew these efforts wouldn't be enough to bring down the entire empire. Her focus remained on perfecting her destabilizer, which she believed could turn the tide if used strategically. Late at night, while the others slept, she worked tirelessly to refine its design. She imagined unleashing its power against the Vadrans, not just escape, but to destroy the heart of their tyranny. Still, doubts lingered in her mind. Was revenge worth the cost? Could she live with herself if innocent lives were lost in the process? These questions haunted her dreams, but she pushed them aside. For now, survival came first. Justice would follow. As the days turned into weeks, tensions within the group began to rise. Some wanted to strike immediately, eager to leave the prison behind. Others argued for caution, insisting they needed more time to prepare. June found herself caught in the middle, torn between competing desires. "We can't wait forever." Minsu snapped one evening during a secret meeting. "Every day we stay here, more people die. And rushing into battle will get us killed too," June countered. "We need allies, supplies, a real plan." Minsu clenched his fist but didn't argue further. Deep down, he knew she was right. Their odds of success were slim, but hope was the only thing keeping them alive. Finally, the day arrived. After months of preparation, the resistance executed their daring breakout. Under the cover of darkness, June activated a series of devices she had planted throughout the facility. Alarms blared as explosions rocked the compound, sending guards scrambling in every direction. Chaos reigned supreme. Using stolen weapons and improvised gadgets, the group fought their way to the hangar bay, where a Vaedran transport ship awaited. The journey was fraught with danger. They faced ambushes, traps, and overwhelming odds. Yet somehow, they persevered, driven by sheer desperation and the promise of freedom. As they boarded the ship and prepared for launch, Ji-yoon glanced back at the burning wreckage of the prison colony. Smoke billowed into the sky, mingling with the crimson light of the dying star. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of triumph. They had done the impossible. They had escaped. But as the engines roared to life and the ship ascended into space, Ji-yoon knew their fight was far from over. The Vaedran Empire still stood, its grip tightening around the galaxy. And until it fell, no one would truly be free. She gripped the destabilizer in her hand, vowing silently that her invention would not go to waste. Someday soon, she would use it to strike at the heart of the Empire and ensure that justice was served. The stolen Vaedran transport ship hurtled through space, its engines roaring like a wounded beast. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Ji-yoon sat hunched over a console in the cramped cockpit, her fingers flying across the controls as she tried to make sense of the alien technology. The others, Min-soo, Soo-bin, and Eun-ji, crowded around her, their faces pale but determined. None of them had ever piloted a Vaedran vessel before, and every second felt like borrowed time. Behind them, the prison colony burned, a fiery scar against the blackness of space. Explosions still rippled across its surface, sending debris spiraling into the void. It was a sight that should have brought relief, but instead it filled Ji-yoon with unease. They had escaped, yes, but at what cost? How many guards or prisoners had died in the chaos? She pushed the thought aside. There was no room for guilt now. Survival came first. Are they following us? Min-soo asked, his voice tight with worry. He stood by the viewport, scanning the stars for any sign of pursuit. Not yet, Soo-bin replied, her eyes glued to the sensors. But they'll come. You know they will. Ji-yoon didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the ship's database. The Vaedrans were meticulous record keepers, and their systems held a treasure trove of information. If only she could crack the encryption. Lines of alien code scrolled across the screen, indecipherable at first glance. But Ji-yoon wasn't just an engineer. She was a problem solver. Slowly, she began piecing together patterns, unraveling the tangled web of data until something clicked. There, she muttered under her breath, tapping furiously at the keyboard. A new window popped up, displaying maps, schematics, and classified documents. Her heart raced as she skimmed through files. Most of it was gibberish, technical jargon about weapon systems and supply chains, but then she stumbled upon something extraordinary. Their home planet, Ji-yoon whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. It's called Zithra Prime. Eun-ji leaned closer, peering over her shoulder. What about it? It's powered by a central grid. Ji-yoon explained, pointing to a diagram on the screen. A massive network fueled by something called Lumina X crystals. Without those crystals, the entire system collapses. Min-soo frowned. So what? We blow up their power source, and suddenly we win. It's not that simple, Ji-yoon admitted. But my destabilizer, it might be able to overload the grid. If we can get close enough. Her words trailed off, leaving the group in stunned silence. The idea was audacious, almost suicidal. Attacking the heart of the Vaedran Empire would require precision, resources, and sheer luck. Yet despite the risks, none of them dismissed it outright. After everything they'd endured, the brutality of the prison colony, the loss of friends and loved ones, they were willing to consider anything if it meant bringing down the Empire. We need help, Soo-bin said finally, breaking the silence. We can't do this alone. Ji-yoon nodded. We head to New Seoul. It's a human colony, heavily fortified. If anyone could support us, it's them. The decision was unanimous. With no other options, they set a course for New Seoul, navigating carefully to avoid detection. Along the way, Ji-yoon continued poring over the stolen intel, searching for weaknesses in the Vaedrans' offenses. Meanwhile, the others took turns monitoring the ship systems and keeping watch for enemy patrols. Days passed in uneasy quiet. The weight of their mission hung over them like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Conversations were sparse, limited to practical matters or brief bursts of encouragement. June barely slept, consumed by thoughts of Zithra Prime and the devastation her destabilizer could unleash. Was she becoming the very thing she sought to destroy? Could she live with herself if countless lives were lost because of her actions? These questions gnawed at her, but she forced herself to stay focused. Revenge wasn't enough. Not anymore. This wasn't just about punishing the Vadrans for their crimes. It was about protecting the innocent, about ensuring that no one else suffered the way she had. That belief kept her going, even when doubt threatened to overwhelm her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, New Sol appeared on the horizon. The colony was a sprawling metropolis built into the side of a mountain, its skyline glittering with lights. Ships of all shapes and sizes drifted in and out of orbit, carrying goods and travelers from across the galaxy. To June and her companions, it looked like paradise, a beacon of hope in a universe gone dark. As they approached the docking bay, Subin took control of the ship, guiding it smoothly toward the platform. Once they landed, they were greeted by armed soldiers, their rifles trained on the fugitives. June raised her hand slowly, signaling surrender. "We're humans," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Survivors of a Vadran attack. We need to speak with Admiral Yoon." The mention of the Admiral's name earned them wary glances, but the soldiers lowered their weapons and escorted the group to the command center. Admiral Yoon was a stern woman in her 50s, her sharp features softened slightly by streaks of gray in her hair. She listened intently as June recounted their story, from the attack on Solace to their daring escape from the prison colony. When June finished, Yoon studied her with piercing eyes. "You expect me to believe you can cripple the Vadran Empire with some gadget?" "It's more than a gadget," June replied, pulling the destabilizer from her pocket. "This device disrupts energy fields. If used correctly, it could overload their power grid and shut down their entire system." Yoon hesitated, clearly skeptical. "Even if your plan works, it's reckless. Thousands of civilians could die." "I know," June said quietly. "But doing nothing means letting them continue their reign of terror. Is that really better?" For a long moment, Yoon said nothing. Then she sighed, leaning back in her chair. "All right, I'll give you the resources you need. But understand this. Failure isn't an option. If you mess up, humanity pays a price." Relief washed over June, though it was tempered by the gravity of the task ahead. Over the next several days, she worked tirelessly to refine the destabilizer, incorporating feedback from New Sol's engineers and testing it rigorously. Meanwhile, Min Su trained volunteer soldiers for the upcoming assault, drilling them relentlessly to prepare for combat. Su Bin coordinated reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence on Zithra Prime's defenses, while Unji studied the psychological weaknesses of the Vadran hierarchy, hoping to exploit divisions within their ranks. As preparations neared completion, June found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the ruins of Solace to the horrors of the prison colony, every step had led her closer to this moment. She thought of Captain Taehyun, who had fought so bravely to protect his crew, of Min Su, whose determination inspired her to keep pushing forward, of all the lives lost along the way. And yet, amidst the grief and anger, there was also hope. For the first time in months, June allowed herself to believe that victory was possible, that they could strike a blow against tyranny and pave the way for a brighter future. Still, doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. Would justice truly be served, or would she simply perpetuate the cycle of violence? Only time would tell. When the day of departure arrived, the atmosphere was electric. Volunteers lined up to board the fleet of ships assembled for mission, their faces etched with resolve. June stood among them, clutching the destabilizer tightly. As the engines roared to life and the ships ascended into the sky, she gazed out at the stars, her heart pounding with anticipation. Zithra Prime awaited them, its fate hanging in the balance. Whatever happened next, June knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop fighting, not until the Vadran Empire burned. The fleet of ships departed from New Sol, their engines blazing trails of light across the dark expanse of space. Ji-yoon stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, her hands gripping the railing as she stared out at the endless void. Behind her, Admiral Yoon's voice echoed through the comms, issuing final instructions to the crew. The mission was clear: infiltrate Zithra Prime, disable the central power grid, and bring down the Vadran Empire. But clarity didn't mean certainty. Ji-yoon knew better than anyone how fragile their plan was. One misstep, one miscalculation, and everything would fall apart. Her mind raced with possibilities. What if the destabilizer failed? What if the Vadrans anticipated their attack? What if they underestimated the enemy's defenses? She clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe deeply. Doubts wouldn't help now. All she could do was prepare for the worst and hope for the best. As the journey continued, Ji-yoon threw herself into work. Every moment not spent sleeping or eating was devoted to refining the destabilizer. She pored over schematics, tested its range, and adjusted its settings until her fingers ached and her eyes burned. Engineers from New Seoul assisted her, offering insights and suggestions that improved the device's efficiency. Yet despite their efforts, Ji-yoon couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, a flaw she hadn't accounted for, a variable she hadn't considered. Min-soo noticed her growing anxiety during one of their brief meetings in the engineering bay. "You're going to burn yourself out," he said, leaning against the console. His tone was gentle but firm. "You can't carry this whole mission on your shoulders." "I have to," Ji-yoon replied without looking up. Her voice was strained, almost brittle. "If this doesn't work—" "It will work," Min-soo interrupted, stepping closer. "We've got your back. We'll make sure it works." His words should have comforted her, but instead, they only deepened her unease. These people were risking their lives because of her idea. If she failed, it wouldn't just be her who paid the price. It would be everyone aboard these ships. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest like a stone. While Ji-yoon focused on perfecting the destabilizer, the others worked tirelessly to prepare for the assault. Min-soo trained the volunteers relentlessly, drilling them in combat tactics and teaching them how to handle alien weaponry. He pushed them harder than ever before, knowing that hesitation could cost lives when they face the Vadrans. Though some grumbled about his intensity, no one doubted his dedication or his skill. Soo-bin coordinated reconnaissance missions, flying ahead of the fleet to gather intelligence on Zithra Prime. Using advanced scanners and cloaking technology provided by New Seoul, she mapped out the planet's defenses, identifying key locations such as military bases, supply depots, and the central power grid. Each discovery brought them closer to success, but also revealed new challenges. The Vadrans had fortified their capital city with layers of security, including automated turrets, patrol drones, and elite enforcer units. Eun-ji, meanwhile, studied the psychological profile of the Vadran leadership. Through intercepted transmissions and stolen data, she pieced together a picture of their hierarchy. The Empire was ruled by a council of warlords, each vying for dominance within the ranks. Their arrogance made them predictable, but Eun-ji warned against underestimating their cunning. "They're brutal," she told the group during a strategy meeting, "but they're not stupid. We'll need to exploit their weaknesses carefully." Despite the mounting pressure, moments of camaraderie helped sustain the team. During rare breaks between tasks, they gathered in the mess hall to share stories and laughter. Someone brought out a deck of cards, sparking impromptu games that lasted late into the night. For a few hours, the looming threat of battle faded, replaced by the warmth of friendship and shared purpose. Even Ji-yoon joined in occasionally, though her thoughts often drifted back to the destabilizer. One evening, as she sat quietly observing the others, Eun-ji approached her with 2 steaming cups of tea. "You look like you could use this," she said, handing one to Ji-yoon. "Thanks," Ji-yoon murmured, taking a sip. The warmth spread through her chest, easing some of the tension in her muscles. "You're carrying too much," Eun-ji said softly, sitting beside her. "Let us help." Ji-yoon hesitated, then nodded. "I know. It's just hard to trust myself sometimes." "No one expects you to be perfect," Eun-ji replied. "All we ask is that you keep trying. That's enough." Her words stayed with Ji-yoon long after conversation ended. They reminded her why she had started this journey. not for glory or revenge, but for the belief that even small actions could make a difference. Slowly, she began opening up more, sharing her concerns with the group and accepting their support. Together, they became stronger, not just as individuals, but as a team. As the fleet neared Zithra Prime, preparations reached a fever pitch. Final checks were performed on every ship, every weapon, every piece of equipment. Volunteers reviewed their assignments, memorizing routes and contingencies. June conducted one last test of the destabilizer, ensuring it functioned perfectly. When the results came back positive, a wave of relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. The sight of Zithra Prime filled the viewports as they entered orbit. The planet was a stark contrast to Earth, its surface dominated by towering spires of black metal and rivers of molten lava. The central power grid loomed in the distance, a massive structure pulsating with energy. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a symbol of the Vadrans' might and the target of their mission. Admiral Yoon's voice crackled over the comms. "This is it," she said, her tone resolute. "Stick to the plan. Stay sharp. And remember, humanity is counting on you." June took a deep breath, clutching the destabilizer tightly. Around her, the others exchanged determined glances, their expressions hardened with resolve. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The fleet split into two groups. Admiral Yoon led the main assault force, drawing the attention of the Vadran defenses, while June, Min-Soo, Subin, and Eun-ji slipped away in a smaller vessel. Their destination, the heart of the capital city, where the central power grid awaited. As they descended toward the planet's surface, the air grew thick with anticipation. Alarms blared in the distance, signaling the start of the battle above. Explosions lit up the sky, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. June watched silently, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. When their ship touched down in a secluded area outside the city, the group disembarked quickly, moving stealthily through the darkness. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from distant clashes between human and Vadran forces. Every step felt heavier than the last, each shadow a potential threat. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the power grid facility. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their glowing red eyes scanning for intruders. June crouched behind a pile of rubble, reviewing the plan one last time. "We go in fast," she whispered. "Disable the guards, plant the destabilizer, and get out before it detonates." "Understood." Everyone nodded, their faces grim but focused. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. As they moved forward, June felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Whatever happened next, she was ready. The fight began almost immediately. Subin took point, using her piloting skills to navigate the maze-like corridors of the facility. Min-Soo covered their backs, firing precise shots that neutralized any Vader enforcers who crossed their path. Eun-ji worked methodically, disabling security systems and hacking into control panels to clear their route. June stayed in the center, guarding the destabilizer with her life. Step by step, they fought their way deeper into the facility, drawing closer to the core of the power grid. Along the way, June caught glimpses of the devastation caused by the ongoing battle above. Ships exploded in fiery bursts, raining debris onto the planet's surface. Buildings crumbled, sending plumes of smoke into the air. It was chaos, pure and unrelenting. Yet amidst the destruction, June found clarity. This was why she had built the destabilizer. This was why she had endured so much pain and loss. To end the suffering, to stop the Vadrans from inflicting more harm. When they finally reached the chamber housing the Luminae X crystals, June felt a surge of triumph. The room was enormous, filled with towering columns of shimmering blue light. At its center stood the core, pulsating with raw energy. It was beautiful and deadly. "This is it," June said, pulling the destabilizer from her pocket. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated the device, setting it to overload. "Get ready to run." The others positioned themselves near the exit, keeping watch for reinforcements. June placed the destabilizer at the base of the core, her movements careful and deliberate. A countdown appeared on the screen, ticking down from 60 seconds. "Go!" she shouted, sprinting toward the door. The group bolted, weaving through the corridors as alarms blared around them. Behind them, the destabilizer hummed ominously, its power building with each passing second. The ground shook violently, throwing them off balance. Dust rained from the ceiling, obscuring their vision. Just as they reached the exit, a deafening roar erupted from within the facility. The entire structure shuddered, collapsing inward as the Lumina X crystals detonated. A wave of energy surged outward, knocking them off their feet. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, slowly, the reality of what they had done sank in. The central power grid was gone. The Vadran Empire was crippled. June lay on the ground, staring up at the sky. Her body ached, and her mind was numb. But somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of hope. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow against tyranny. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, she knew they had taken the first step toward a better future. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the power grid collapsed, sending shock waves rippling through the air. Dust and debris filled the sky, casting a choking haze over the landscape. Ji-yoon coughed, her lungs burning as she struggled to rise from the rubble. Her body felt heavy, every movement an effort, but adrenaline kept her moving. She glanced back at the crumbling facility, its once mighty spires now reduced to jagged ruins. The destabilizer had worked, better than she dared to hope. "Move!" Min-soo shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. His voice cut through the chaos like a knife, snapping her out of her daze. Around them, the others stumbled to their feet, wiping soot from their faces and brushing shards of glass from their clothes. They didn't have time to celebrate. Not yet. Behind them, the facility groaned ominously, its structural integrity failing under strain of the explosion. Chunks of metal and stone tumbled down, crashing into the earth with deafening booms. The group sprinted toward the extraction point, dodging falling debris and leaping over cracks that split the ground like scars. Each step was a gamble. The terrain was unstable, and the aftershock showed no sign of stopping. Soo-bin led the way, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. "This way," she called, pointing toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. It wasn't much cover, but it was better than being caught in the open. As they ran, Eun-ji brought up the rear, keeping a wary eye on their surroundings. She knew the Vadrans wouldn't give up easily. Not even now, when their empire teetered on the brink of collapse. When they finally reached the relative safety of the buildings, Ji-yoon collapsed against a wall, gasping for breath. Her legs burned, her chest heaved, and her mind raced. For the first time since setting foot on Zithra Prime, she allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. The central power grid, the heart of the Vadran Empire, was gone. Entire cities would plunge into darkness. Their armies would falter without the energy to fuel their weapons and defenses. It was a victory, but at what cost? Min-soo knelt beside her, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "You did it." Ji-yoon shook her head, guilt gnawing at her insides. "Too many lives, too much destruction." "We didn't have a choice," Soo-bin interjected, her tone firm. "They attacked us first. They started this war. What we did, it's justice." Justice. The word echoed in Ji-yoon's mind, hollow and cold. Was it really justice to destroy an entire system, knowing innocent people would suffer? Or was it simply revenge masquerading as righteousness? She wanted to believe Soo-bin was right, but the weight of her actions pressed down on her like a leaden blanket. Before anyone could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps froze them in place. Boots clanged against the pavement, accompanied by the guttural chatter of Vadran voices. Reinforcements had arrived. "Hide!" Eun-ji hissed, gesturing toward the shadows cast by the crumbling structures. The group scattered, pressing themselves against walls and ducking behind piles of debris. Ji-yoon held her breath, her heart pounding as the Vadrans marched past. Their armored forms loomed large, their glowing red eyes scanning the area with mechanical precision. For a moment, it seemed they might pass by unnoticed. But then one of them stopped, tilting its head as if sensing something amiss. "They're on to us," Min-soo whispered, gripping his weapon tightly. "Get ready." The Vadran raised its rifle, aiming directly at their hiding spot. Without hesitation, Min-Su sprang into action, firing a burst of shots that sent the alien staggering backward. The rest of the squad turned, their weapons trained on the group. Chaos erupted as both sides exchanged fire, the narrow streets becoming a battlefield. Ji-Un crouched low, clutching a stolen blaster in trembling hands. She wasn't a fighter. She never had been, but survival demanded she adapt. Every shot fired felt like a betrayal of who she was. Yet she couldn't afford to hesitate. When a Vadran lunged toward her, claws extended, she pulled the trigger instinctively. The creature stumbled, collapsing to the ground with a guttural scream. Ji-Un stared at it, her stomach churning. Killing wasn't supposed to feel this easy or this hard. Amidst the gunfire and explosions, Eun-ji spotted an opportunity. "There!" she shouted, pointing toward a maintenance tunnel partially hidden by rubble. "We can use it to escape." "Go!" Su-bin ordered, laying down covering fire as the others scrambled toward the tunnel. One by one, they slipped inside, the narrow passage swallowing them whole. The darkness was suffocating, lit only by the faint glow of emergency lights embedded in the ceiling. The air smelled of rust and decay, and the walls vibrated with the distant rumble of collapsing structures above. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Ji-Un noticed blood trickling down Min-Su's arm. "You're hurt," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "It's nothing," he replied, though his pale face suggested otherwise. He didn't slow down, pushing forward with grim determination. None of them could afford to stop, not while the Vadrans were still hunting them. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a sprawling underground chamber. Pipes crisscrossed the ceiling, dripping condensation onto the floor below. In the center of the room stood a massive generator, its filling the space with a low, steady drone. Ji-Un frowned, studying the setup. Something about it seemed familiar. This is part of the secondary grid. Eun-ji realized, her eyes widening. If we disable it, we'll cut off whatever backup systems they're using. "But how?" Ji-Un asked, glancing around nervously. The longer they stayed, the greater the risk of discovery. "We overload it," Min-Su said, stepping forward. "Like we did with the main grid." Ji-Un hesitated. Overloading another system meant risking further destruction and potentially killing more civilians. Yet leaving it intact gave the Vadrans a lifeline, a chance to recover and retaliate. Once again, she found herself torn between two impossible choices. "Do it," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "But make it quick." Using tools scavenged from their packs, Min-Su rigged the generator to short-circuit. Sparks flew as wires fused together, creating a feedback loop that caused the machine to whine ominously. "Let's go," he yelled, motioning for the others to retreat. They barely made it out before the generator exploded, sending a shockwave rippling through the tunnels. The blast knocked them off their feet, throwing them into a heap of tangled limbs and shattered equipment. When the dust settled, they lay there for a moment, stunned but alive. "We need to keep moving," Su-bin urged, helping Ji-Un to her feet. "They'll be looking for us." The group pressed onward, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels, until they finally emerged into the open air. Above them, the battle raged on. Ships clashed in the sky, their weapons lighting up the clouds with bursts of color. Explosions rocked the horizon, shaking the ground beneath their feet. It was pandemonium, a symphony of destruction that left no room for doubt. The Vadran Empire was crumbling. Admiral Yoon's voice crackled over their comms. "Objective achieved. Fall back to the rendezvous point. I repeat, fall back." Relief washed over June, though it was tempered by exhaustion. They had done what they set out to do, but the price had been steep. Lives lost, worlds scarred, futures uncertain. As they limped toward the extraction site, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Vadrans might have fallen, but the galaxy was still fractured, still haunted by the scars of war. When they finally reached the fleet, battered and bruised but alive, Ji-Un climbed aboard the ship and sank into a seat, her body refusing to move another inch. Around her, the crew cheered, celebrating their hard-fought victory. But Ji-Un remained silent, staring out at the stars. Somewhere beyond those distant lights lay Earth, her home. And somewhere within her own heart lay the question she feared most. Had she become the monster she sought to destroy? For now, there were no answers, only the quiet hum of engines carrying them away from Zither Prime, toward whatever awaited them next. The fleet limped back to Earth, its ships battered but victorious. The journey home was long and quiet, the weight of what they had done hanging heavily over everyone. June spent most of her time alone, staring out at the stars as they streaked past the viewport. Her mind replayed the events on Zither Prime, the explosions, the screams, the lives lost. She had achieved what she set out to do, but the victory felt hollow. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those who had died because of her actions. When the fleet finally entered Earth's orbit, a cheer erupted among the crew. Below them, the blue-green planet glowed softly, a reminder of everything they had fought for. But June didn't join in the celebration. Instead, she stood apart, clutching the railing as tears welled in her eyes. This was her home, yet it felt foreign now, like a place she no longer belonged to. As the ships descended toward New Sol, reporters and officials gathered on the landing platform, eager to hear their story. Cameras flashed, and voices shouted questions about the mission, the Vadran Empire, and the future of humanity. Admiral Yoon stepped forward to address the crowd, her voice strong and steady. "Today marks the end of a dark chapter in our history," she declared. "But it is also the beginning of a new era, one built on peace, unity, and hope." June watched from the sidelines, feeling disconnected from the jubilation around her. She wanted to believe in Yoon's words, but the memories of destruction lingered too vividly. How could anyone call this peace when so much harm had been done? She slipped away unnoticed, seeking solitude amidst the chaos. In the days that followed, June struggled to adjust to life on Earth. The media hailed her as a hero, crediting her destabilizer with bringing down the Vadran Empire. Reporters begged for interviews, and strangers approached her on the street, thanking her for saving humanity. But June couldn't accept their praise. To her, the destabilizer wasn't a symbol of victory. It was a reminder of the devastation she had unleashed. One evening, as she sat alone in her small apartment, Min-Soo knocked on her door. He looked tired, his once bright eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "You've been avoiding us," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We're worried about you." "I'm fine," June replied automatically, though her tone betrayed her lie. "No, you're not," Min-Soo countered, sitting across from her. "None of us are. What we did, it changes you. But running away won't fix anything." June sighed, rubbing her temples. "What do you want me to say? That I'm proud of myself? That I think we did the right thing?" Min-Soo leaned forward, his expression serious. "I don't care if you're proud or not. What matters is what you do next. We destroyed the Vadrans, but that doesn't mean the galaxy is safe. There's still work to be done, rebuilding colonies, helping survivors, preventing another war. You can't let guilt stop you from making things better." His words struck a chord deep within June. For weeks, she had allowed herself to drown in regret, convinced that her actions made her unworthy of redemption. But Min-Soo was right. Dwelling on the past wouldn't change it. If she truly wanted to honor those who had suffered, she needed to focus on the future. With renewed determination, June began reaching out to others who shared her vision. Together, they founded the Solace Foundation, named after the hospital ship that had started it all. Its mission was simple: to heal the wounds left by war and ensure that such atrocities never happen again. They converted abandoned facilities into shelters for refugees, distributed food and medical supplies to struggling colonies, and developed technologies designed to promote peace rather than conflict. Soo Bin and Eun-ji joined the effort, lending their skills to the Foundation's various projects. Soo Bin coordinated supply runs, using her piloting expertise to navigate treacherous routes and deliver aid to remote areas. Eun-ji worked tirelessly in field hospitals, treating patients and training local medics to handle emergencies. Even Min-Soo found a role, organizing community programs aimed at fostering understanding between different species. As the months passed, June threw herself into her work, channeling her grief into something constructive. She designed advanced medical equipment capable of diagnosing and treating conditions faster than ever before. She created communication devices that allowed isolated communities to stay connected, reducing the risk of misunderstandings that could lead to violence. And she traveled across the galaxy, meeting with leaders and survivors, listening to their stories and learning from their experiences. Though the scars of war remained, progress was undeniable. Colonies rebuilt their homes, families reunited, and trade routes reopened. Slowly but surely, the galaxy began to heal. Yet Ji-un knew the road ahead would be long. The Vadrans were gone, but their legacy lived on, in the ruins of cities, the broken bodies of survivors, and the lingering fear that another empire might rise to take their place. On one of her trips, Ji-un visited the site of the prison colony, where she and her friends had been held captive. The facility was deserted now, its walls crumbling under the relentless assault of wind and time. Standing amidst the wreckage, she felt a strange sense of closure. This place had once been a symbol of despair, but now it represented resilience, the strength to endure even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Eun-ji accompanied her, carrying a bouquet of flowers native to Earth. "For Min-Su," she said softly, placing the blooms on the ground. Ji-un nodded, her throat tightening as she remembered her friend's sacrifice. Min-Su had given his life to protect hers during their escape from the power grid facility. His death weighed heavily on her conscience, but she took comfort in knowing that his memory inspired countless others to keep fighting for a better world. Back on Earth, Ji-un addressed a gathering of volunteers at the Solace Foundation's headquarters. Her speech was brief but heartfelt. "We can't undo the pain caused by war," she told them, "but we can choose how we respond to it. We can rebuild what was lost, help those in need, and create a future where compassion triumphs over cruelty. That's what this foundation stands for, and that's what we'll continue to fight for." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the room. For the first time in months, Ji-un allowed herself to smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That night, as she gazed at the stars from her balcony, Ji-un reflected on everything she had endured. The attack on Solace, the horrors of the prison colony, the fall of the Vadran Empire, all of it had shaped her in ways she never imagined. She thought of Captain Taehyun, whose bravery had inspired her to keep going, of Min-Su, whose courage reminded her that even small acts of defiance could spark change, of Su-bin and Eun-ji, whose friendship had carried her through the darkest moments. And though she still carried the burden of her choices, she realized that guilt wasn't the enemy. It was a reminder of the responsibility she owed to those who had suffered. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about building a world where such suffering never happened again. Somewhere beyond the stars, the universe stretched out endlessly, full of possibilities. Ji-un didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she was ready to face them, not as a victim, not as a weapon, but as a builder of bridges, a healer of wounds, and a beacon of hope. She whispered a silent promise to herself, to Min-Su, and to everyone who had lost their lives along the way. "Your sacrifices will not be forgotten,"